Paladin, The Path Begins by David M. Sidders. Chapter 1. Tarvid's sword whistled through the air. Years of training had made his strokes fluid as he moved effortlessly from a defense to attack under the gaze of his mentor Tarson. "Excellent, Tarvid. Your movements are perfect," Tarson commented, never taking his eyes from him. He finished his last series of strikes before his blade stopped just inches from Tarson's face. "Your control is remarkable. With your mastery of swordsmanship, every trial has now been passed," his mentor stated, smiling broadly. "You think I'm ready for the judgment now?" he asked of his mentor, brushing strands of his long hair from his eyes. "It matters not, Tarvid. You turn 18 today and your judgment is inevitable," Tarson replied, his own long brown hair hanging loose as he held Tarvid's gaze with his crisp blue eyes. Tarvid had hoped he would be granted more time. The judgment was his final test. Final judgment of whether he was worthy to represent the Order in the wide world. "What happens if I fail?" he asked a little nervously, placing his sword back into the rack on the chamber's far wall. Tarson shifted his stance, a slight movement, but one Tarvid noticed was certainly out of character for the usually calm Paladin. "I cannot tell you, Tarvid, though I wish I could. Some traditions the saints make immutable." Tarvid knew his mentor was conflicted. He had been Tarson's only student for so long now that Tarson regarded him almost as son, and Tarvid felt him to be the father he'd never had. "Perhaps read over the chapters of Tarmine, verses 6 through 15, Tarson ventured cautiously. It was a little to go on at least, he thought, mentally noting the information for later. Tarvid bowed, Tarson clapping him on the shoulder. "Try not to worry. I'm sure you'll be fine." "If you say so. How many even passed the judgment?" Tarvid asked, straightening up. "The right amount," Tarson responded, before leaving him in the large training room. Tarvid removed his breeches and shirt before going to the shower in the far corner of the small room, turning the iron lever carefully and letting the water run over him. He knew that it should be cool, but he couldn't feel such sensations as hot or cold, and hadn't done so in years, a side effect of his body having gradually and repeatedly undergone rituals and concoctions during his initiate training. Such things were conducted on all the initiates, though many did not survive the process. Whilst he knew this was a necessary step to strengthen his body for the path ahead, he often wondered whether the benefits were truly worth the loss of sensations it brought. Tarvid turned off the shower and dried himself off, preparing to meet Tarson later for the judgment. He dressed in a plain white shirt, breeches, and calf-length boots. Leaving the training room, he strode through the keep of Whitecliff. He could hear the clamour of the nearby market now, sellers of all kinds attempting to offload their autumn wares before the chill of winter closed in. He moved through the keep quickly, knowing its halls like the back of his hand after living here for so long. He nodded greetings to the guards he passed, gaining one back in response with a smile. Rumours often spread around the keep like wildfire. Tales of Tarvid facing the judgment had caused a clamour within the fortress, especially since it had been some years since any initiate had emerged from it. He knew only of 3 successes in his own lifetime. He made what could be the last visit to his own dwelling, a small and humble room containing the essentials he required to live. Tarvid took a large leather-bound book from the chest, the old wooden box creaking open stiffly. He flicked through the pages slowly and carefully, the old book seeming delicate, yet it was nearly 1,000 years old. Tarvid found the verses Tarson had told him of. They were of purity and virtue before judgment. Perhaps his fate was already decided. He placed the book back into the chest, going to the basin and looking at himself in its still water. He now stared at the reflection of a man, no longer the boy he had felt first thing this morning. Tarvid had often thought of cutting his hair short, but had kept it long instead like Tarson's. He remembered overhearing people mention how alike they were, like father and son. He had often received a gentle knock on the head in his younger days when Tarson caught him looking at his reflection for too long. Tarvid sidestepped a blow to his head quickly, hearing Tarson's usual bellowing laugh follow suddenly. "Never could get you out of that habit. At least you're always prepared now," he chuckled, his morose mood seemingly gone now. "Come, Tarvid, it's time," Tarson told him, his tone serious once more. Tarson tossed a bundle to him, Tarvid raising his eyebrows at the contents. "Your tabard," Tarson said. "You're going to be a journeyman of the Order soon, Tarvid. You should look the part." Tarvid gave his thanks, pulling the tabard over his head and allowing the garment to flow over him. Its blue cross of Tour d'Auvergne emblazoned on the chest and back. "I have to say, I do look good," he smirked, admiring the pristine garment with pride. Tarson clipped him round the head with a smile, handing him a long sword sheathed in a plain leather scabbard, the pommel of the blade inset with a small iron cross. They walked side by side, down through the corridors with their boots echoing off the stone tiles. What happens if the saints find me unworthy of their blessing? If I fail the judgment? Tarvid asked again, airing his growing nervousness. Tarson merely smiled. I have no doubt you will be found worthy. You honour the saints, and, most importantly, Tarson stopped, placing a hand on Tarvid's shoulder. Your heart's in the right place, and the saints will appreciate that. They continued walking in silence as they left the barracks, passing through the saints' cloisters where the other initiates were being taught the sword forms he had mastered long ago, though only a half-dozen were there now training. The Paladin numbers had dwindled greatly from their levels in the heyday of the Order. With the plague ravaging the country, only a handful of brothers and sisters were garrisoned at Whitecliff now, with new recruits a rarity in recent years. Tarvid could see the great gates of Whitecliff Castle were closed. The gates normally opened to allow petitioners to enter and request the aid of the Paladins, yet there were so few around now that most petitioners were turned away. They entered a small chamber inside the great keep, guarded by 2 brother Paladins. They both nodded to Tarson, his standing in the order without peer. The Paladins opened the doors for them without a word, and they entered the chamber together. Inside the chamber, Tarvid looked upwards, spotting 5 round stained-glass windows set into the walls. Depicting heroes of old, the sheer artistry of the glasswork awed him. He had never been inside this chamber before, with it being forbidden for initiates to enter, and though he could have sworn they were at the centre of the keep now, light still beamed in through every window. When you're ready, Tarvid, step onto the dais, Tarson told him, indicating the platform in the centre of the room. It was made of solid marble. A soft white light emanated from the centre. Tarvid started feeling the nerves of before re-emerging. Not going to wish me luck? Tarvid asked his mentor, trying to deflect his nerves. You don't need it. Saravel guides you, and Tarmine protects you, Tarson replied dispassionately, standing by the door like a guardian. Tarvid slowly walked around, stepping onto the dais cautiously with his heart pounding in his chest. So, how do I start? Tarvid asked, reaching the centre of the dais and throwing up his hands. Blue flames erupted around him as he spoke, trapping him inside, and instinctively he crouched down to avoid the flames that now engulfed him. Tarvid's eyes went wide, the blue fire fading away quickly as he stood up slowly. As his eyes adjusted to the now pristine white light, he found himself staring out over thousands of kneeling figures, clothed all in white, each with a sword-pointed blade down to the ground, heads bowed, obscuring their faces. Greetings, Tarvid. It is time for you now to face your judgment, spoke a female voice, that had once seemed familiar yet wholly unknown. Tarvid turned to look upon the speaker, then fell to his knees at once, somehow instinctively knowing that this was Saint Saravel, the matriarch of the Order herself. She was more beautiful than anyone he had ever seen before, wearing flowing white robes and bearing a gleaming golden sword. The light that had once been emanating from the marble floor below now shone from within her, yet at a far greater intensity. He was hard-pressed to even look upon her. You come to us, Tarvid, to be judged as the Order deems fit, spoke a male voice, the speaker appearing beside Saravel. The voice belonged to Saint Tarmine, who appeared in the same spectral form as Saravel, though he wore gleaming battle plate, his golden sword sheathed at the hip. Tarvid now understood why nothing had been told to him of this place. The room was a place of direct contact with the saints, and such a place must remain secret. I have, he answered, far more confidently than he felt. Who were these others surrounding us, though? The saints looked around them proudly, casting their eyes upon each kneeling figure. They are those who failed the judgment, Tarvid, and now safeguard our Order. Should you fail, your fate will be to guard the Order for all of time alongside them, Saravel said without emotion. The 2 saints flowed gracefully towards him. Raising their blades in unison, they placed the points upon his shoulders, then a moment later slashed down across his chest. And though the strikes left no wounds, they instead produced a flood of his memories, spilling out around him like water from a fountain. Tarvid noticed the kneeling figures look up, their eyes burning with a blue flame. He saw himself in his early years standing up to boys from the village, when he was quick to violence and remembering the beatings he'd both taken and given. Tarson had saved him from that dark path, and the memories caused him to rub the scar upon his temple. Other memories came forth, and he realized they were flowing into a scale now held by Saravel, who never broke her gaze from him. Tarvid knew this was his judgment, with his deeds being weighed. He saw his life playing out before his eyes, feeling like an eternity had passed by until finally the flow of memories stopped, the scales heavily weighted to one side. The judgment is complete, Saravel declared, his stare still fixing him in place. "You have a troubled past, Tarvid. However, you have within you an unyielding desire to do good, and though your soul is purifying still, we have rendered our verdict," Saravel told him, looking over to Tarmine, a brief glance flashing between them. The scales vanished, and she held her sword once again, the point held to his heart. He froze, unsure if this was to be the day of his death, a new role as a guardian. "You are worthy, Tarvid. Now go forth upon the path, for our blessing will be with you," Tarmine told him proudly, placing a hand on his shoulder as Saravel lowered the blade. Somewhat reluctantly, he thought. Tarvid noticed a ripple of movement from the kneeling figures, though at a glance from Tarmine they were stilled. The flames engulfed him once more, and as the scene before him faded away, the world seemed to swim, shaking him violently and making him vomit. Tarson came up the steps quickly, handing him a cloth. "Intense, was it?" Tarson asked with a relieved laugh as Tarvid wiped his mouth clean. Huge understatement," he replied with a croak, Tarson pulling him to his feet unsteadily. "I don't think I ever want to do that again," he said shakily, steadying himself on Tarson, who kept him balanced. "We all go through this judgment, Tarvid. Though many don't return, many lack your heart, and in my view, that counts for a lot," Tarson told him with pride, helping Tarvid down the steps. Tarvid groaned at the pain crippling his whole body as Tarson helped him back to his chambers. Dusk was beginning to set in when they finally arrived, and Tarvid wondered how much time he would have before setting off on his path. Being in the presence of the saints had taken a great toll on his body, and he needed time to recover. "Get some sleep, Tarvid. Then gather your things and meet me at the fortress gates by midnight. Your path begins tomorrow," said Tarson gently, closing the chamber door behind him. It would seem this was his last night in Whitecliff.